See live. There we go. Live on YouTube.
I think I did it.
You think you did it.
We're live.
Greetings and salutations, fellow agorists and adventurers on planet Earth. Welcome back to Unloose the Goose. Today we have a special episode on communicating the values of freedom. And as you can see, we are a bunch of dudes. We've got John Bush, Sal Mayweather, Peter R. Quinones, and CJ Kilmer, and myself, Xavier Hawk, here to talk about and kind of dive into what it means to be living at this time and communicating the ideals of agorism and true liberty and true freedom to people who may or may not be, down with the cause or educated about it. Would that be a good summary, my friends?
Yeah.
Sounds good to me.
Cool.
How to effectively communicate.
Yeah, so we'll just start going across the screen here and say the first question would be, have you any actual experiences dealing with people who don't know WTF is going on and or are on the other side of the aisle, let's say, who are complete clowns and or sheep and don't understand what agorism really is about? And if so, why don't we start off with a story? So John, you want to kick us off?
Well, just one thing. This is something I brought up in our little Goose group chat, but as far as tips on how to effectively communicate, because we're all missionaries and we're not just libertarians who appreciate the philosophy, but we're all active in helping to educate and bring more people in the fray. And it's my belief that if we want to more effectively do that, then we ought not to use words like sheep or covidiot or normie. And I use them on my own, but when you're talking with your friends and stuff, but it arouses a resentment and puts an immediate block, and there's an air of hubris to it.
Right.
And so that's just one of my things. I had a long period where I was like that with other people, and I realized it wasn't effective. I additionally had that with other libertarians. So whenever I got into agorism and anarchism and post-political activism, there was a period where I had my nose in the air at the political libertarians, and I would call them names and say they're wasting time. And I just realized that I was just being a jerk or coming off as a jerk. And so I tried to have a little bit more patience and compassion. And so I can't relate a specific story, but I do think foundationally, in my opinion, some people are just fed up with it and done with the peons and the masses and they're just over it. But I think it's good to try to have compassion from where everyone else is, because all five of us on this chat right now, Pete's doing a little air jerk off for the podcast audience. All five of us on this chat, I imagine, weren't born philosophical libertarians or didn't, understand it our entire lives. So it's good to be patient with people. That's my 2 cents. 2 satoshis. Yeah.
Do you have a story of how that went horribly wrong at one point?
Not that I could think of off the top of my head at the moment. Okay. Wish I did, because stories are good for podcasts.
Yeah. Sal, how about you?
I agree with John. I think that's really step one, is you have to be polite, right? You can't, no one's going to take advice from someone who's a dick to them, right? So that's step one. But otherwise, I think some tips that some things that I've done that have seemed to have worked well are avoid ad hom attacks. Don't whenever somebody does attack you with ad hom, I'll only respond to the part of the argument that isn't an insult. And eventually, if you just keep doing that and they keep lobbing ad homs at you, eventually they have to take your argument seriously. So I think it's just step one is just to be polite and to treat people with respect. And then that's the only way you're going to get them to consider your opinion.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it's anytime that we have a discussion where it reverts to ad hominem, it just kind of devolves from there, right? How about you, Peter?
I think the anonymity of social media is probably the worst facet of it. I think when people, it's funny when any event I go to, the event I went to recently, I meet people that I've been interacting with online. And normally what I find is I meet people that I've only had positive interactions with.
Right.
People who are being completely negative and over the top online, they're not coming to these things. I mean, they're just basically trolling. They're not going to show their face in public. I've said some awful shit to people, and if people want to come to an event and ask me about it, I'll say it to their face if I believe it was right, if it was true. But the anonymity of social media just, I mean, it's something that's going to be written about. Books need to be written about it, because it's basically the downfall of any kind of discourse. And if you're somebody who wants to see division, like myself, I'm not really worried about it. So
yeah, it's interesting, the idea of social media showing our true selves. Let's say, I don't know that it's not necessarily our true selves, but that anonymity sort of gives people some sort of like inborn permission to be deplorable, right? To use a familiar word. I think that it does, like you said, it breaks down discourse. I think we'll have a lot of things to say from that going forward here. How about you, CJ?
Yeah, well, a lot of what's already been said has been great. And I would add, we all go through our individual character arc in our lives as we figure things out and figure out what we think about the world. And it's a very common thing for a relatively new convert to any belief system to be really obnoxious and like super extra autistic about it.
Right.
And to be trying to push it at people who are not interested or receptive at all.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think the longer that you're in a belief system and the more you've really tried to test it by hammering it against counter arguments and exposing it, exposing your ideas to people who disagree and whatever, the more you become comfortable and confident in your beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
And you're no longer defensive or aggressive, right?
Right.
You're relaxed and confident. And you're more likely in that maturity and wisdom, you're more likely to understand, kind of when to push and when to retreat. And I've just found this in my own life because I teach history as a day job, that, I'm teaching hundreds of people every semester who
Mm-hmm.
have all kinds of who knows what beliefs and whatever.
Right.
And I don't mask my perspective. I don't, hide my point of view on things, but at the same time, I've tried to cultivate I don't know if the right term is soft sell in a way, but a non like bludgeoning approach. The
Right.
way they probably get in all of their, kind of typical progressive classes, that is most of what else they're taking in college, right?
Yeah.
And so it seems to mostly work. I mean, I've had a lot of students come up to me at the end of the semester, back when we had in-person classes, and sort of say, like, this class really kind of affected how I think. Every now and then you get a student who has a negative reaction or whatever. But
Mm-hmm.
in my experience with this sort of approach, it's relatively rare, versus if I was just bludgeoning them brute force, trying to hammer my ideas into their skulls.
Yeah.
It probably wouldn't work.
It reminds me of something Jack said on the last episode, which was instead of trying to convince others, why not just live those traits, live that free lifestyle, live that self-reliant lifestyle, and then show up. And it might have been Nicole who said it too. It's like you radiate something different. You radiate that new experience, that sort of liberty, right? You really feel libertarian, you feel free, and people are like, what's different about that person? And they want to find out. It's better to be in that position to answer their curiosity than doing, I think we also mentioned that last episode, the MLM sort of like selling you on a ideology or way of living, right?
Yeah. And it's the difference between push marketing versus pull.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So
That's
kind
good.
of
we pursue that which retreats from us.
Mm-hmm.
To
Right.
an extent, right? So
Yeah.
sometimes I tell my students, like, hey, don't read this book over here that I'm mentioning to you, right?
Yeah,
Like, it's
yeah.
bad. If you read it, you're a bad American. You're a bad person.
Yeah, that works a lot with younger folks too, right? Like they sort of have this rebellious nature because everything that they're fed is just nonsense, and then they want to find out the truth, right?
There's a book by David Friedman called The Machinery of Freedom, and he lays out some nice anarchist philosophy and some practical what things could look like. But he talks about education, and he says one way to educate is through books and lectures and podcasts. Another more effective way is through showing and demonstration. And so I think that's kind of what y'all are riffing on, just because everyone's like, anarchy doesn't work. When did that ever work? How could it work? And I always like to point out cryptocurrency and Bitcoin blockchain. Like, it's literally anarchy in action. Now, mind you, it's like being leveraged by the state and intelligence agencies and contact tracing and stuff. But in essence, cryptocurrency, there's no central authority, there's no hierarchy, there's no coercion. So it's literally anarchy in action. You can point to something concrete, and then people will more readily accept that it is possible.
Yeah. One of the challenges that I'm finding is living that. I am very much like an outspoken proponent for freedom, liberty, and, I go out of my way to elucidate better ways of living. I don't have a podcast like each one of you guys, but I do take part in a lot of podcasts, and I do activate myself in public, right? Like if I go to a store and somebody says, no, you have to wear a mask, like I can't let that go. I have to have a discussion with them in real time about it,
Yeah.
It caused me a great deal of consternation. I am on the board of my children's school, and it is the whole thing is based on Rudolf Steiner and anthroposophy, the philosophy of freedom, right? And the whole premise of the education pedagogy is to get those students to embody, feel good and confident in themselves, to critically analyze the world around them and step and walk in such a way that they are embodying and living in liberty and honoring the soul and honoring life. And they are mandating masks. And I'm like having this discussion with them, and all I'm getting is refutable science, and we want to help people, we want to show that we're compassionate, but really the core of it is a fear of litigation. If we don't wear masks and somebody gets sick, then we're open for lawsuit. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. There's like this balance between, it's your kid's school, so you want to have a level of decorum and not go off the rails, but at the same time, something like the kids being put in masks, your children being put in masks, is really critically important. I guess that's a circumstance where if you're a really good persuader and the opportunity's there, then that's something to really push for. But at the same time, there's a lot of different values that are in play. That's a tough one. So what's going on? Are your kids still going? Are you pulling them out, or what's happening?
I am considering pulling them out, but it also goes to my wife, who's like, why are you being so divisive? And it's like, what do you mean? Like, how is that divisive to stand up for what you believe in?
Yeah.
Peter, what do you think?
I mean, it's in those situations, I assume it's a government school.
It's a private school, bro.
Get them out.
Yeah.
I mean, I went to Catholic school for high school, and I mean, it's sort of a private education, but I mean, there was still so much government control over it. I mean, what can you do?
Yeah, and even in Florida, they removed the mask mandate. So it's like, I think this is like super critical right now. Like, this is the discussion, right? Like, I posted earlier something to the effect of, if you wondered what you'd be doing in 1930s Germany, you've got your answer right now, Yeah,
everybody's complying. I feel blessed. My kids also go to the private school, but the school director's totally with it, and there's no semblance of going to be a mask thing. This brings up a tip that I have for folks. I was a big proponent of Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. That really played a big role in my development as a communicator and persuader. It's a great work. My criticism is that he idealizes the Carnegies and all these guys, these big evil, cartel capitalists.
Right.
New term, I realized. Although they ought to be emulated if you want to build an empire or be successful. They're very successful people. But one of the biggest tips that stuck out to me was to speak in terms of other people's interests.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So figure out what it is that what motivates people, what they want. And in this particular example is why it came to mind. So in trying to persuade them, if you recognize that perhaps their biggest need or desire or concern in this situation isn't freedom, right, or slowing down the technocracy and sticking it to the Illuminati or whatever, like some of us may think, but it's a concern for litigation. So speak in terms of their interest. Maybe there's some avenues, maybe there's some precedent. There's not a lot of precedent now because it's new. I know that was one of the things that they were talking about with this new relief package they want to push through, is they want to give liability protection for businesses that send their workforce back, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that's just a good tip for folks. So in this particular circumstance, they're concerned with liability. So I'd be curious if there's any way to speak in terms of that, or if there's any opportunity for them to be made to feel more comfortable.
Yeah. Sal, when you're out in public and, seeing people that are wearing masks and, or, complying with the state in different ways, like how do you address it in your day to day?
I ignore them. I walk right past them. I think that I think you quoted Jack from last episode, you have to sort of lead by example. So I don't wear the mask when I'm out in public. I don't wear it at the grocery store. I think so far I had to wear it once. So I had to take my cat to the vet. That was the only time I actually had to wear it.
Right.
So far I've been pretty good. I really do believe in leading by example. I don't think I don't think you can just sort of tell people what they should do and then do the opposite. So I do the best I can. I try not to wear it as much as possible, but also I think it's also about knowing your audience and knowing how to speak to people. So you're not gonna convince like an AOC supporter that they shouldn't be wearing a mask, right? That's out of the question. So
right.
you're just wasting air by going down that road. So know your audience, but also like know how to speak to people. There's this great little book by Drew Weston, who's a neuroscientist from Emory University in Georgia, and it's an older book. He's definitely not on our team, right? This guy's like I think he was like an advisor for John Kerry or Barack Obama or something, but he breaks down in the book the difference between liberals and conservatives, leftists and rightists, but he does it from a neuroscientific standpoint. And the ultimate conclusion that he comes to is that the main difference is that rightists tend to value fairness, whereas leftists tend to value compassion, and like independents and moderates, they sort of fall in the middle. So know who you're dealing with and how to speak to them. Check out that book though, because there's also some great tips in there. But again, at the end of the day, you really have to lead by example.
CJ, how are you doing that? When you mentioned like your students, you'll just drop little tidbits or even like warn them against things. Let's say outside of the school setting, you're out in public and you're being asked to put on a mask. How are you dealing with that at this time?
I'm generally just taking the gray man approach. I refuse to wear a mask in situations where I think it's ridiculous and absurd. If I'm going into a private business and there's people in close quarters and the business is saying wear a mask, I just, I pick my battles.
Right.
And that's not, the hill I'm going to die on. Now, I'll tell you, if they start, Florida hasn't done this, but I know some other states have. Whether it's the state or the feds or whoever, if they start making mask mandates that are, you have to wear it all the time when you're outside of your house, and even if you're riding a bike by yourself out in an open field and whatever, like, fuck that, right?
Right.
But to me, it's I pick my battles, and if I'm going into a little private business and they have a little please wear a mask or whatever, I put a mask on. But,
Yeah. I've put on a mask. Like my daughter wanted to go to an art gallery, and this was in Asheville, North Carolina, and they are all terrified up there. And if you don't wear a mask, you are a sociopath and you don't care about people and you want everybody to die that's over 65, right? It's just like that
all true.
Yeah, that described Pete perfect, Peter.
Yeah, there is zero like middle ground, right? And it's sort of like everything's become so polarized now. It's like, if you think any one of Trump's policies are good, that means you hate LGBTQ and want to, like, you know,
You're a fascist.
yeah, and a racist, and there's like no middle ground.
Nazi.
Like,
I've gotten to the point where when somebody yesterday posted, some commie on Twitter posted Rothbard, just like that one quote when he's talking about children, where he says, in a free market, in a libertarian order, there would be a thriving free market for children.
Right.
And I was like, and somebody tagged me in it to say, look what this guy wrote. And I was like, I'm just going to take it even further. Based. And I just typed based under it. And the guy's like, really? And I'm like, I'm somebody who's witnessed Ceausescu, the result of Ceausescu's orphanages in Romania firsthand. The free market would handle this much better. You're trying to make it about, and I told him, you're trying to make it about pedophilia because that's what you have on your heart.
Oh,
Right.
got him. What does based mean? I don't know. Is that a internet term? I don't know what that means. It means you agree, I presume.
The new woke.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
It's just like, he nailed it, knocked it out of the park.
Oh,
You know what I
okay.
mean? But to the nth degree.
Okay.
That's a new one for me too.
I'm going to
John.
use that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look at what a disaster all of like the foster homes and the children's youth services are, and how many scandals and like the horror stories that come out of all of these like state youth groups and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
At least if there was a Rothbardian flourishing free market of children, where you'd have to pay, you would ensure that the children are only going to the most qualified parents and the most qualified and stable families that are going to give them the best upbringing possible.
Yeah.
That could be
another.
another episode.
Yeah,
I think it brings up a good point though, because there's like two approaches that you can take in trying to wake people up to the philosophy of liberty. One of them is the like provocative ANCAP. I forget who it was. One of these intellectual thinkers wrote a book. Is it the Bourbon book? But it's deliberately, the focus is to go after those provocative topics in a free society. I forget who it is. Maybe it was Jeffrey Tucker.
So like sort of purposefully poke the bear.
Yeah, he literally decided to go after the controversial topics that make libertarians look a little extreme or lacking compassion, right? One approach where it's like 110% and what you see is what you get. This is raw freedom. This is what it looks like or could look like. It could be ugly. There could still be some harm or some undesirable things or whatever. Just like legalize heroin, right? I remember Ron Paul in one of the debates, they're like, Mr. Paul, Dr. Paul, isn't it true that you've once advocated for the legalization of heroin? And he was like, well, of course, if heroin was legalized tomorrow, would you be shooting up heroin in a back alley all of a sudden? But so that's one approach. The other approach is to try to soft pedal, like the Libertarian Party wants to be conservative light rather than throwing out the radical, consistent message of liberty. And so
actually, they want to be woke left now. So
yeah, that's the new thing. They're all over the place.
I think there's a distinction between what you're saying and how you're saying it, in the sense that you can project a very radical message, but in a way that is smooth and non-threatening,
palatable,
and that doesn't cause what a psychologist would call the backfire effect, right? Where you hammer someone with contradictory ideas, even if it's all like footnoted with perfect evidence, whatever, but it causes a backfire effect. It causes people's defenses to go up and they double down on their beliefs after you've just given them a mountain of evidence showing that it's wrong, right? And so there's a difference between what the message is versus how you're getting it across, right? And I think that you can shake someone's paradigm with a radical message in a way that doesn't cause their defenses to go up. And I also think you can bludgeon someone with a really blunt radical message if you've already built some amount of rapport with them. Right.
I think that's the key right there, is the rapport, because a lot of people don't make decisions based on rationale or reason. They make their decisions based on where are all the other humans going and what do they all think. And, I want to be okay. Right. There's this fundamental insecurity that many people have. I don't think anybody on this panel has, but that they want to be accepted and or not targeted. I mean, I get the gray man approach out in the public and all of that, But at some fundamental level, we are all confident in our assertions. We are confident in our beliefs, and somebody providing us with actual factual evidence would make any one of us pause and be like, wait a minute, okay, let me look at that. But for the general masses, I don't see that as like the motivating factor, because if you bring the evidence, like, you know, viruses are this many microns and a cloth mask only stops this many microns, you know, and you're wearing a chain link fence, it's like, but I heard all of these news articles saying this, and why are you not compassionate for all these other people? And it's like, but that has nothing to do with reality. So how do you couch, then I think you're trying to get to that, how do you couch those facts? And I think that's the purpose of this discussion. How do we couch those facts and logic in such a way that it makes the other people comfortable to be able to even look at it? You know, do you have to be like, this is what, put it on a t-shirt, this is what the cool kids are thinking? You know what I mean?
Have a celebrity say it.
Right.
I think it's one thing I realized early on in my activism career, when the same thing kind of was brought up, like we were talking about a second ago, I was in the Ron Paul movement, and I was also a 9/11 truther, because that's where I got my start. And there was this whole hush, hush. We can't, like, the Students for Liberty held a conference in Austin, and I was considered as a speaker, but they turned me down because I was a 9/11 truther. Hush, hush. And so there's this provocative, but I realized we don't need to tailor our message to appeal to the masses. Just the same, like CJ was saying, there's a lot of people, and you were saying, Hawk, that a lot of people, you can present them with a rational, well thought out argument in a nice, soft, benign way, but they're going to reject it because their predisposition is against all of that. And they're already invested in believing that it's real because they've been such fools, like all of us, wearing masks and doing early stuff and complying with the lockdown. But what I realize is that there's enough of us that think the way that we do, that if we were to shift our focus from waking more people up and swelling the ranks, while it's still important, to organizing ourselves and opting out and participating in counter economics, for example, I think there's enough of us to already get things done. And so maybe it's not even necessary to spend so much of our time beating our head against the wall to try to wake up a Democrat, for example, when we could spend more time coalescing and growing our strength with those that are already initiated.
Yeah, building our own economy, essentially, you know, getting some vitality in the organization of all these people who are all over wondering, what the F, what do we do, right?
I think you just hit the nail on the head, John. I'm not sure it really matters that we convince people of the philosophy of freedom, right? Like, it doesn't really matter if we convince them to use Bitcoin. Eventually, they're going to be, economic forces will persuade them into moving out of fiat currency and towards sound money. It doesn't matter really if we convince them about the utility of 3D printing, because as gun laws become more oppressive and more restrictive, they're going to be forced into those sorts of solutions, into like the counter economy. So I'm not really sure it matters that we convince them. I think that the technology and the counter economic aspects will sort of speak for themselves.
Right on.
Yeah.
There's this guy, Dan Kennedy, who's one of my gurus as far as entrepreneurship. I got Grant Cardone, Russell Brunson, who does funnel stuff.
Yeah.
And this guy, Dan Kennedy's old school direct marketing advertising guy. And he says there's 3 elements to successful advertising or marketing. There's message, market, and media. So the message is what you say, the market is who you say it to, and the media is what vehicle you use to convey it. And I think oftentimes we spend so much time speaking to the wrong market altogether. We're selling pain relief products to the guy that's in the best shape of his life and doesn't have anything to do with pain, just the same, right? Or we're selling liberty or trying to sell liberty to somebody that really appreciates the big government and the role that it plays in their lives. And so I think we would save ourselves a lot of headache if we made sure that we are on point with our market, people that are ready and willing to hear. And oftentimes those people are on the fringes of the mainstream society. We're like Democrats or Republicans, they're pretty normal people, but they're starting to get fed up and disillusioned. And that's where we can pick off from the edge.
Okay. So I got a great question for you guys, and we'll start with CJ, since you haven't spoken for a minute. Do you think that now that the media has been shown to essentially be a tabloid propaganda arm of this, you know, the globalists, let's say, that everybody's seeing through the lies, and do you think that there is going to be, or already is, a backlash into the where people get their news from, or whether they think for themselves more so than what they're fed?
I think there's an opportunity for a certain percentage, but one of the things I've become convinced about from studying history for like decades, it's really kind of sad, is
Awesome.
that, yeah, most of the people in most times and places are just kind of ballast in the sense that they're not really ideological. They're not really interested in ideologies and in intellectual consistency. They're just, going through, and, some of them are basically good people, right? But they're just, going kind of through their business.
Yeah.
And they're just kind of going with the flow, right?
Yeah.
And
like
so
whichever way the wind blows.
Yeah. I mean, even if you look back at something like the American Revolution, right, which, has all of its flaws and shortcomings and didn't go far enough or whatever. Yeah. But, I mean, we don't have scientific polling data, but most of the people who were observing it and writing about it said it was a small percentage of the people that were really like gung ho for independence and all that.
Yeah.
And, and then a certain percentage were Tories. And then most people were just kind of going with the flow, and they sort of went whichever way the wind was blowing and whoever seemed to be winning.
They were just trying to get their food, trying to grow, trying to live.
Trying to live.
And so I think it's important to keep that in mind, just in terms of the idea of being strategic and efficient and choosing your battles and all that, that it's like that old essay, was it Albert J. Nock, Isaiah's Job?
That's a good one.
Right. Yeah, where he kind of says, like, you're not talking to everybody. You're talking to the small percentage who are
the remnant.
Exactly. Receptive to what you're saying.
Peter's got something. Go ahead, Pete.
And there's a remnant inside the remnant.
Yeah.
On this podcast.
I can have as much as a 2,000 download per episode difference. If I have Dave Smith on to talk about the culture wars, blow up. If I have a historian on to like go over like the war of, CJ is right there. But if I have like Danny Scherzen, who's a military historian taught at West Point, there'll be 2,000 less downloads.
Wow.
I mean, even within the quote unquote, and I hate this term so much, liberty community, liberty movement, there's a remnant. There's people in the movement who, I mean, literally, and as somebody who shares memes, there are people who only know anything about libertarianism from memes. That's
right.
They've never read a book.
Right.
They don't. I've been following your account for 3 years. You have a podcast? No, only 485 episodes. I mean, they don't care. They're online. They're just they're having a good time. I mean, it's just all bullshit. I mean, and that's just the culture at hand. If we think, I mean, I abandoned a long time ago, and it's really embarrassing to admit that I actually thought that, you had to get like over 50% of the people to believe like you believe. That's just so fucking retarded to think that. It's not even going to be, I mean, it's going to be percentages. Right. So that's why and then when you watch and anyone who doesn't agree with me on this, then you just haven't been paying attention the last 8 months, because the last 8 months has given you a microcosm of the whole of history, and how most people don't want liberty. They want to be safe, and they don't care how much freedom they have to give up in order to get it.
Yeah.
Wow. Do you think that's a genetic thing?
That's a good question.
Well,
I don't know.
If you just look back, for example, at the Russian Revolution, like the Bolshevik one, right? Not the first one.
Yeah.
Look at what percentage of Russian people actually were Bolshevik communists. It's like almost nobody.
Yeah,
right?
It was 500.
Yeah, I mean,
it was about as many Antifa people as there are.
Like one square block in Petrograd.
Right. And they were able to do it. Now, granted, there's a difference with that philosophy, because that philosophy is fixated on, sociopathic power grabbing, right? And so it's different from what we're pushing, right? So they were totally happy to take over whatever they needed to take over and kill whoever they needed to kill, right? But still, the principle of it brings to mind, there's a famous Sam Adams quote, actually, where he says something like, "It doesn't take a majority to prevail, but a minority keen on setting brush fires in the hearts of men," right? That's not a perfect quote, but it's pretty close to what he said. And yeah, I mean, if you look at history, it's like radical minorities that mostly push events, while most people
you're not
kind of
talking
go with the
racial
flow.
minorities, just to be clear. You're talking about ideological minorities.
Sure. Yeah,
You're
absolutely.
talking about like the Bolsheviks and the communist sort of ideology that took over and killed 60 million people in Russia.
Right. Or to take a slightly, less horrific example, like the Sons of Liberty in colonial Boston, right? Who, weren't most people in Boston.
What's that, Sal?
Where the term 3%er comes from. It was the idea that you only need 3% of the country to rise up and you can overthrow the government.
Yeah. And the thing in my observation would be like the liberty-minded folks aren't proactive in expanding their ideology. They're more interested in living it, right? Like what Jack and John and what we've all said is like, when we're living it, we're not out there marketing it. The evangelical
ones, at least.
Say that again?
The consistent ones, at least. There are some people in the liberty world who, spend their time canvassing neighborhoods and working phone banks for political powers. The consistent ones are out there taking direct action.
Yeah. And it's sort of like the reason why evangelical Christianity has succeeded so much is because, I mean, even before evangelical Christianity, you got the Catholic Church forcing people. They had expansion in mind. They had conversion in mind. I don't think any of us here are out like evangelicalizing or trying to convert people. We are mostly looking for our ideological family, right? And so it comes to this question of communication. Is it better to sit back and wait to go to battle, let's say, with the despots of the left and the right, or is it better to be proactive and evangelicalize, or I don't even know if I'm saying that right, evangelize, to grow the movement? What do you think, John?
I think that we need a diversity of tactics. And so for some people, they enjoy putting out a podcast or knocking on doors or sign waving. Other people want to do more agorism or live more free. And so I think that it benefits us that we go out and try to recruit more people and pick off the people on the fringes of the mainstream to swell the ranks of the agorist cadre. However, if that's all everyone did, then we would be doing ourselves a disservice. So I think more important, in my opinion, because I believe that you can't have one. If you only do one, then you're going to be unsuccessful. If you only do the other, the agorism, then you still can find success. More importantly, I think that we ought to spend more of our time figuring out how to live free, how to navigate freedom in an unfree world. And then the beauty is the synergy, which we've been talking about. I think that's my big takeaway from this episode, that the best way to communicate is to show people. And so Jack Spirko does a great job of going out and showing his fishing. Jack's not here, but he's like here. We keep bringing him up, showing his pond and his permaculture projects, right? Me and my ex-wife did a project called Sovereign Living, where we lived on a 2.5 acre farmstead, and we produced this pretty high quality reality show of us trying to get off grid and grow our goals and deal with the neighbors across the street without relying on the police because they were neglecting their dog and stuff like that. So I think a good tactic for people that are doing, like Sal was talking about, doing the agorism and being consistent, is to show people, because there's also people that are just liberty-minded, libertarians, small L, big L, that don't know how to opt out or don't know that they can trade crypto through a coin mixer and have it be totally anonymous. Or, we need to show people and kind of help them to evolve into more radical spaces.
Who's done more for to promote sound money? Every book written by Jim Rickers and Peter Schiff or Satoshi Nakamoto, right?
Yeah.
Who's done more to secure gun rights for everybody? Every dollar donated to the NRA, every phone call that they've made, or Cody Wilson and Ivan the Troll and the work that they've done with 3D printing and stuff like that. So it really comes down to direct action. People are going to follow you if they're going to respect your ideas if you show them that they work, rather than it's just all hot air.
Right. You actually have to be active and doing it.
Exactly.
Walking the
Proving
walk.
it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A lot of the stuff is new and fresh. It's like 3D
yeah.
printing guns and stuff. That's pretty new phenomenon. It needs to be proven out. Same thing with cryptocurrency. It was originally just a bunch of cyber geeks that were like, well, let's try this internet money out. Let's give it a test. And then it took on a life of its own. So people got to be willing to get their hands dirty. And
As a curious
elbow
aside,
grease.
as a curious aside, I sometimes beat myself up for not launching Firon when it was called permacredits in 2015. Because we would have raised a shit ton of money just because of the excitement, right? But the tech wasn't ready. I don't think the population was ready. And I'm like looking at things now and I'm like, this is like the perfect time to launch. But anyway, Peter, did you want to speak to that previous thing? We've got a question on the chat that's actually pretty good.
What? I'll do the question.
Okay, so the question was, how would you market a community for rich preppers? Or really, like, how would we communicate this new lifestyle? Let's say we built the perfect libertarian utopia. How would you market it?
Would you have to?
No, it'd probably sell out within the first, opening. But let's say
they marketed a potential libertarian utopia
Anarchopia or whatever
in Liberland, and like people were paying for passports.
Yeah.
Or Gulch. Everybody bought into that and ended up being a bust.
Oh, that was a total bust. I don't know. I mean, respect and all, but like I knew that from the second I saw it. What about you, CJ? How would you market a libertarian utopia?
I would put like political sounding stuff out of the marketing and focus more on, don't you just want to live your life? Like I'm someone who wants most of life to not be political, right?
Yeah.
Now we can't, like, I hate that politics has invaded almost everything, right? Used to be we had sports and weather at least, but now that's political, right? So I would market it from the perspective of, don't you want politics to just not matter and not be a thing? And you just, you take care of your family and you hang out with your friends and you run your business and that's it.
Yeah.
Well, that's my answer.
Left alone. I think also speaking to that, when you're marketing something or selling something, it's important not to sell the product or even the features, but first to sell the benefits, what problem you're going to solve, what life will be like, what will be fulfilled. So some good keywords would obviously be freedom, calmness, tranquility, relaxing, not having to worry.
Selling the sizzle, not the steak.
Yeah, there you go. That's an important distinction I think a lot of people should follow.
I've got a good answer for this, but I want to hear Sal first, and then I'll say something I think might be counterintuitive, but might be pretty cool. So go ahead, Sal.
I agree with Pete. I don't think you really I don't really think you'd have to sell it.
Right.
Once people see that, in the libertarian utopia, the police won't murder your children, well, it's a pretty easy sell then. You're not going to go with the police, the public police.
Right. Yeah, but then you'll get a whole bunch of BLM activists who don't want,
right.
the funded police station. So I was thinking is don't market it at all, like you said, Peter, but even more so, make it exclusive and sort of like secret. Like there's this club in San Francisco called the Battery, right? And there's only so many memberships allowed a year or whatever. And the only way you can get a membership is if a member invites you in, and every member gets 2 memberships that they can give out. So the way that they worked it is like this microeconomy now, where it's like it's so exclusive, it's so high end that they don't let anybody in, but like that's where everybody who's cool or hot to trot or fucking launching the next big thing in Silicon Valley, where they go and hang out. And what they do with their microeconomy is like, I'll give you, John, a membership, but you have to give me one back. So like you get to be a member, and now you have one membership that you can share with somebody else, but I get my membership back so that I can choose somebody else. So there's like this social hierarchy of who get there first kind of thing. And that sort of exclusivity is really appealing. It's kind of like what you were saying, CJ, earlier. It's like, don't look over here. You don't want to be part of that group, right? And the kids are like, well, now I do, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, don't read this book because you're a bad American. Don't come join this community. We don't want you.
Right. And yeah, so I'm like there's something there in that. And I don't know how, again, if it's a genetic thing or whatever, but there are like the people that you want involved with your organizations. Let's say, like, John, you've got the freedom cells. It's like you don't want just any old schmo in there. You want people who are going to be active, who are, contributing, who are like-minded already. And it's almost like by putting up a barrier to entry and making it a little bit more exclusive, it's like, well, why are you saying no to me then? Like, what do you got? Right. And this is a lesson I've learned in business. Go ahead.
Yeah. There's a concept of having your dream customers. This is something Russell Brunson, who does ClickFunnels and funnels. You want to have dream ideal customers, and you create like an ideal customer avatar or whatever. But for me with Kratom, I started, my biggest initial marketing push was on the Tom Woods show, like over a year ago. And then I was on Jack Spirko shortly after that. And I've been on Pete's show and Derek Bro's Conscious Resistance. So literally a significant majority of my customers are anarchist libertarian preppers. And so I'll call them up. I try to follow up with as many customers as I can. And they'll be like, oh my God, I loved your podcast the other day. Or they'll be like, hey, I had a question about the Kratom. By the way, I just joined the Freedom Cells website. It's great to be involved with the network. And so it's perfect. And then if they have an issue, I'm not like, begrudgingly going to help. Not that I would if it was just the general public, but it's like, these are my crew. This is my community. I'm going to go out of my way to make sure that they're taken care of because we're part of the same network. I think I'm super duper lucky and privileged, but that's how I set it up,
Yeah.
In business, you don't want just, imagine like a progressive customer that's all nitpicky and wanting to control every aspect of everyone else's lives. They're probably going to be the same way when you come into a customer service situation,
Right. And so you have an ideological base already of like-minded individuals. It's like, how do you organize that?
Yeah, they're great to do business with.
Yeah, that's great. Pete, what about you in terms of, your podcast and how you've kind of come up in communicating these messages? Can you tell us a little bit about how you got started?
Probably just out of hubris.
Yeah.
Thought I think I know more than everyone else. So started a podcast, and like the first 14 or 15 episodes was just really basics of libertarianism, voluntarism kind of thing. And then I just got into doing interviews, and most of the interviews that I did were
this is you interviewing others, right?
Yeah, this is me interviewing others, and I wanted to learn stuff, so I'd have an expert on this come on, an expert on that come on. Now I've taken it to the point where, I can go 3 or 4 episodes where there's nothing libertarian I even talk about. It's just, I might talk about philosophy, or I might talk about whatever. I'm doing it now just for out of the love of it, out of the love of knowledge, and people want to come along for the ride. That's fine. And every once in a while I'll do something where, I'm going to, if something in the culture really strikes me, then I'll have someone to come on and talk about the culture and everything like that. But it's not something I jump to. I'd rather talk about the history of the idea of hegemony and where it came from, and do a whole episode on that with a friend of mine, than have a discussion about the non-aggression principle for the 15,000th libertarian podcast episode.
Right.
And
So when did your podcast start?
July 2017.
Nice. That's a good run.
That is a good run. So, and it goes to what we were saying earlier, light the fire and then your people will come, right? Make a big enough noise in the right frequency and those people will be attracted to it. And you kind of like get the people that are there for the basic, like libertarianism, right? But then now that you're going into all of these other subjects, it's like you're bringing them along, like you said, for the ride, and it's stuff that they're opening up to, so it's almost like what I'm getting from this conversation already is that we don't need to go out and proselytize and like evangelize these things. We live our thing, and then those who are attracted to that initial frequency will come along for the other stuff. And so we're able to like educate them deeper into it. Sal, has that been your experience?
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I also think there's like a certain value in maintaining a purity of principle, right? People will respect that if they see that you're sort of a consistent approach to your philosophy. So, I agree with everything you guys said. The only thing I would add is that it's important to, even when it's unpopular, always maintain like the pure approach, because then people will, they're going to learn to respect not just the sort of the community or the sort of what's the word I'm looking for, like the connotations surrounding your movement, but they'll actually respect the principle that sort of undergirds all of it.
That's good.
Yes.
I have a question for y'all.
Go ahead,
John. Somebody else has something to riff on that. What do y'all think about the word anarchist or anarchy or anarchism? I personally like it because it's provocative, but it does have a lot of baggage, especially with the Antifa stuff and throwing bricks through window with a black hood kind of deal. So what do you guys think about using the term anarchism or identifying as an anarchist?
Anybody mind if I go first on that one? Because I just read that whole thing about Whitmer and that there are these guys like trying to kidnap her.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It turns out that they were trying
FBI plot.
Yeah. It smells of COINTELPRO FBI setup, right? But that evidently they were trying to do that for somebody in Virginia, one of the governors in Virginia as well. And they are anarchists, and they got the big flag in the back, anarchists, and but they can't pin down whether they're Trump supporters, because some of them are never Trumpers, some of them are BLM, some of them are not. It's like this weird amalgamation of
just
anarchists,
people.
Right? Yeah, just people, right? But like the media
supporting anarchists.
Right. The media spun it as like these right-wing guys, and they were completely not, completely not into that at all. And so that whole thing died out from the media real quick. And my initial reading of it was like, this, like anarchists, it's like, and meanwhile, we all know Jack, we all know each other, we all know that we ascribe to those principles, but we are generally like good, decent human beings who can get along well with others, right? But the public perception of an anarchist is like Mad Max freaking throwing bricks through windows, like you said. So I don't like the term, although I ascribe to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was always like hesitant to assume the moniker anarchist, and then I remember I was listening to, this is years ago, I was listening to an episode of the Tom Woods show, and I was like a big history nerd, and he mentioned this guy named Ralph Raico, this historian. So I ended up reading a little bit of Raico and watching some of his YouTube lectures, and he's like this like older grandfatherly sort of dude, and he's like comes across as very amiable and very friendly. And I start to think to myself, man, if this guy could be an anarchist, then why the hell can't I? Who cares if they think you're crazy? This guy clearly isn't crazy. And then, of course, you look up Murray Rothbard and Leonard Liggio and a lot of these, that other crew of
right.
circle of folks right there, and it sort of takes away the nastiness of the term.
Do you have something to say about CJ?
I guess it's, you always run into the trouble of terminology. It's the same thing with the word capitalist. It's like, What does it mean? What do people think it means?
Right.
Right. And so with these sorts of words, I come to the same place I come with a lot of things, which is, it kind of depends on context and use them strategically. Like if you're talking to people that you think have a view that anarchists are all a bunch of antifers out there, burning down businesses or whatever, then I would not be quick to identify myself with that label. Right. In the same sense that people whose perception of capitalism is it's, JP Morgan Chase, I wouldn't be quick to say, yeah, I'm a capitalist, and I support all that. Right. So, I mean, I like the term anarchist in theory because I know the history of it and what it's supposed to mean. But as far as I try to avoid labels a lot of the time in talking with people, because labels often put people off who might actually be receptive to the point you're going to make. Right. But they hear a label that for whatever reason spooks them, puts up the defenses. And so, I've become more and more reluctant to start dropping labels.
That's a good point.
Unless someone really knows where I'm coming from. Right.
What about you, Peter?
as someone who co-executive produced an hour and 45-minute documentary on the history of anarchism.
I love it.
That was a good section in the documentary. It was lengthy, and I learned a lot from that part about anarchism.
Yeah, that was a really good part. I don't try to use it anymore. When I do use it, I'm talking more about individual anarchism. If the last 8 months has taught me anything, there's not going to be anarchism in my lifetime and the lifetime of any of your kids or your grandkids or your great grandkids. Right. It's just not going to happen. So when I talk about it, I talk more about individual anarchism, and that I want to live as an anarchist, and I should be allowed to. Michael Malice says you should be allowed to change your protection service as easily as you change your cellular provider. Something more like Max Border's idea of panarchy, where you can live on the same block with people who, you have a house that's full of anarchists and you have a house that's full of people who are subscribed to some government somewhere. Yeah, I mean, I just don't, as far as an anarchist society, I've given up on that idea. It kind
of goes along, like it has similar to prepper, right? Like that was a buzzword for a while, maybe 5 years ago. It's like it was this whole movement that started, and the whole industry started around it and servicing the people who were intelligent, looking around and saying, this isn't going to last. And then they labeled them. They didn't label themselves. They were labeled the preppers, right?
After doomsday preppers.
Yeah, exactly. And
we rate your preps 2 out of 40.
Yeah, and so there's this whole subset of people who got that label put on when they're really just like Peter and CJ said, just like these are just people who are trying to do their thing and do it without being bothered, and not be put in a box and express and exercise their liberty, right? Because
any sort of group that threatens the state apparatus, they're going to try to paint with a negative brush. Like even the Tea Party, when Ron Paul was running with the Tea Party, they were sort of the kooks, and the 11 truthers, right?
Truther, Tenther, the 10th Amendment peeps.
Yeah, right. Any sort of group that
anti-masker now is a thing.
Yep.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Except just add ER to the end.
The only ones that they try to maintain, the only terms they try to protect from that sort of tainting is like socialist and democratic socialist, and the terms that they fall in line with.
Yeah. Right. And how did socialists become like a good thing, right? Like that's like of course we want democratic socialism, and it's like anybody with half a brain would go, no, we don't.
That just goes to show you how strong the indoctrination is when they can sort of ruin the term capitalist, which has lifted hundreds of millions out of poverty, and they could sort of raise up the term socialist, which has killed hundreds of millions.
Rothbard talks about how it's this essay, Left, Right, and the Prospects for Liberty, and he talks about the original left-right divide, and it was in the French Assembly where the left sat the radicals that wanted to overthrow the monarchy, the right sat the conservatives that wanted to conserve the status quo. And he says that so there was this classical liberal philosophy, which is the roots of libertarianism. It's also the roots of socialism, although communism is probably rooted in the total authoritarianism. But he says that the socialists took over the idealistic path. They took it away from the libertarians, essentially. And rather than relaxing constraints, which was some of the original classical liberal philosophies, freer markets, not just for the political or the parasitic class, more mobility, a higher standard of living, it was the socialists that took up that banner, which is a good banner, right? Like libertarians often are like private property and we want to protect us from the state, rather than selling like the socialists do, like this utopia or a more ideal society. And that was a divergence where the socialists kind of had a stronger footing in the minds of men and women. And the Thomas Jefferson types and that whole philosophy turned into libertarianism, but it's not as popular as socialism today, probably because government controls everyone and indoctrinates, and they have an interest in promoting socialism and keeping it the sexy thing for everyone to strive towards compared to libertarianism.
I wonder if we can flip that script and make libertarian sort of philosophy of freedom more sexy, more
popular.
There is a sort of utopian element to that. And we just have to switch what we think of utopia as. Like,
how are we going to do that when
Peter's got his mask on for those of you who can't.
How are we gonna do that when this is like the default in majority areas? I understand that there are people listening to this who live in the middle of BF and no one's wearing masks. Congratulations on you and your 100 people.
Yeah.
Okay. But the overwhelming majority of the people are. Okay. Congratulations on your little fucking space out there. Okay. But the majority of the people are. Okay.
Right.
Fucking wake up, people. People don't want liberty.
Most
It's
people
dangerous.
don't.
It's scary, right? That
Yeah, they want comfort.
safety. And it comes down to that root fear of like, I'm going to die someday. And I'm going to avoid every thought that lets me think of that because I want to be comfortable and be safe. And the truth is that who was it that said I would take a dangerous freedom over a safe tyranny? Jefferson.
That's a good one.
Yeah,
we're all on board with that. Then peaceful slavery.
Yeah,
I think the mask, speaking of the mask, like, and showing utopia, again, we're not trying to wake up the masses as we've addressed before. And it is true, like Peter was saying, that people don't want freedom. The bulk of people don't want freedom, which is why one of the reasons why the Libertarian Party does so terribly. It's because like people want to control other people. But the simple act of not wearing a mask in public and smiling at people, it is inspirational for some people. And like we've found in business dealings, like me and my girlfriend went to meet with this realtor to talk about buying properties. And we show up, it was an outdoor place, but I'm just done wearing the mask in 98% of the instances. We show up to this outdoor coffee shop, no mask. He has a mask on. And he's like, is that okay? We're like, oh, no, of course. And then I'm like, are you a handshaker? I put out my hand. Homeboy shakes my hand nice and firmly. And you could sense a relief in him. Like, oh, I don't have to put on this show and I don't have to put on this front. And so I think the simple act of not wearing a mask as often as possible and smiling at people will bring comfort, and it'll show you like, okay, that's one of my people. Sometimes they'll like pull the mask down, or at least they'll give you a nod. You know, it's a good way to. I was just thinking about that because we're like, how do we show people our utopia? Well, maybe things are so bad these days. Utopia is freaking smiling
out the window. Yeah. I'm having an issue with my wife right now because I am very much like, masks are not okay. Like, this is not okay for anybody who is thinking for themselves and can examine the evidence. And she's having she's like, why are you being so divisive? And I'm like, this isn't divisive. Again, this is like just being and speaking my mind. How could that be so offensive?
Just get on the boxcar. What's wrong with you? Come on, man.
Yeah, exactly. And like,
and as long as those boxcars are owned by private companies, libertarians will write glowing Yelp reviews for them.
Exactly, and they're comfy inside. I mean, come on, you'll have like free drinks at the bar.
Resort.
Just to like hit what Pete was talking about before, I think he's right. I think the majority of people don't want freedom, so that's why it's so important that we act as individuals and not sort of as members of groups, right? You can't free your neighbors, right? You can show a horse the barn door, but you can't make them walk through it. But you can take steps in your life to secure your freedom, right? You might not be able to convince everybody as to the benefits of sound money, but by saving your wealth in gold and silver and using cryptocurrency, you can take steps to protect yourself from what you as a libertarian know is coming. Or somebody's just paying attention, for that matter.
So is that the end game then? Just prepare for the worst?
I think so. I'm not even just prepare, but
Peter's nodding his head vehemently.
I mean, that's where we're at right now, you know. And it's so funny because I talked to Curtis Yarvin. Most people know him as Mencius Mulbug, and he was this person who was like 10 years ago advocating overthrowing the government. Okay. I mean, over like a coup.
Right.
And now what he's saying is he goes, this thing is so out of control. You don't know where the tail is. You don't know where the head is. The government is completely decentralized. It's so decentralized that like, if you wanted to overthrow it, what are you going to go at? Right. What are you going to do? I mean, so he's like, get out, be neither a dissenter nor a collaborator, and get out and start and ignore it.
Well, it's a great time to do something new. Right? It's a great time to, if everything's going chaotic and history is being rewritten and nobody knows which way is up or down, all it takes is like one strong voice and 3% of the population to be like, here's a new path that we can all take. And everybody will be like, please. Yeah. Sal, you were going to say something.
Sorry, man.
No. You guys hit the nail on the head. That 3% that you're talking about, that's us, right? That's the agorists. That's
Right.
hopefully what we're doing here is hopefully to try to get that done and try to convince everybody. So
The Great Reset, the powers that be, those in power, the oligarchs, the New World Order, the globalists, they are seizing the opportunity and accelerated everything with COVID. They have the Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, the Great Reset from the World Economic Forum, and then all this technocracy that they're rolling out, which we've talked about in previous episodes. So I think definitely, like I was saying, the play is how do we insulate ourselves from that? How do we navigate and become free, live free in an unfree world? It's a challenge for sure.
And here's crazy me, like, all right, we're going to build a new system in the middle of all this nonsense. And hopefully we get it together fast enough and quick enough that people recognize the value and maybe put up a good fight.
That's the play.
I sort of think about it like, do you guys ever remember like when you're a kid and you get on a skateboard and you're on the skateboard going downhill, and as it gets faster and faster, you start to lose control, and eventually you fall. That's sort of the way I see the state. And like, as they get more restrictive and more oppressive, right, that skateboard starts to wobble more and more. And eventually that angular momentum picks up and you lose control, and then the rider falls off. And then at that point, you have this sort of collapse of society. I think that we're at the point now where we're like violently shaking, and it's just a matter of time before that rider falls off.
Yeah. We have an opportunity to get on a new skateboard.
Yeah, it reminds me
of skateboarding, right?
Star Trek. I don't know how many of you guys have watched Star Trek, but one of the movies was First Contact, and like the board came, they went back in time, and they went to the first warp drive test that this guy Zebrin Cochrane did, and it was in 2053. I watched it the other night, so I remember the details now. It was in 2053, 10 years after the Third World War, and the United States was no more. And there was like the Eastern Coalition and the Western faction and all these different factions in the United States, like a balkanized United States. And they all had high technology still, but it was like camps, like hundreds of millions of people died, nuclear things went off. And it was basically like living in camps, but they were building this warp drive spaceship in an old missile silo in Wyoming. And that has always stuck in my head as like a really likely scenario where all of these rails, like you were saying, John, where the skateboard's going so fast, the whole thing, Sal, you were saying that, the skateboard's going so fast and, it falls apart, and there's still remnants of like the old ride still going on. And I see, if I were to, prophesize, I could see that being a scenario where all of the major powers in the world kind of fall apart, but the globalists who've been running things behind the scenes are planning on that, so if we let it get to that point, it's almost like the game's over before it's even started.
I think a lot of it's economics. I think a lot of it has to do with, Misesian business cycle theory and the central bank just overinflating the currency. And eventually, once the dollar goes down, all of the other, we're the reserve currency for how many emerging markets. So eventually, it'd be like a dominoes. So that's the way I foresee it, at least.
Going down.
In history, when in like the collapse of the Roman civilization, let's say, how did they pick up the pieces and who did? And how did it work economically?
Church.
Yeah.
That was part of it in a lot of places. Yeah. I mean, a lot of it was just,
Weren't they the cause of it though? Didn't they like want it? Wasn't the church like working behind the scenes to help overthrow the Roman Empire so they could do their own thing again?
Well, what's his name? Who was the emperor who made Christianity the official?
Constantine.
Constantine,
well,
yeah.
A lot of people think it was Constantine. It was actually a later guy who made it the official religion of the empire. It was Constantine who just made it allowable and tolerable as co-equal.
Okay.
Yeah, there was a later guy. I can't think of his name, who actually
that was
made the religion, right?
That was right around 311 that the whole Constantine thing came into fashion, where the church would basically, it's like people say, oh, what happened to the Holy Roman Empire? They're in Vatican City.
That's right.
They're right there.
They just went behind the scenes. Instead of running things on the front, they decided it was more cost effective and more efficient to do it from behind the scenes. Put their puppet kings out. And like that's why I said, isn't there like some tie there? Like, didn't they decide like, hey, it's better to not run the country, let somebody else run the country, and then just run things from behind the scenes? CJ?
Yeah, well, what emerged from the collapse of the Western Roman Empire was basically, in most places, local warlords. That's really what it came down to,
Yeah.
and some of them were barbarians and some of them weren't. But,
Mhm.
part of the story of the collapse of the Western Roman Empire is that the economy had gotten very specialized, and there was a lot of regional, interregional trade.
Mhm.
And so, specialization, woohoo, Adam Smith, all that stuff. It's great, except for when things break down and regions can't really trade with other regions. And then suddenly, oh, you got to figure out how to make, wine
Butter.
in Northern Europe if you want wine, right?
Right.
And, but one of the, and this gets back to some previous episodes, one of the things that happened was because the Roman army had long since become a professionalized, distinct class of society, was no longer, had centuries ago had been a militia representing the common people or whatever, but what had become a distinct professional mercenary class. When the Roman state collapsed, it was like, what localities know how to fight and
Mhm.
defend themselves from the breakdown, right? Because when the ability to defend yourself becomes a rare specialized skill, then when that central authority does start to break down, a lot of times who ends up in charge is like,
The thugs.
who in your neighborhood, has the guns and knows how to use them and whatever. And so
Might makes right.
yeah. And that's
Yeah, and people
potentially
talk
a messy situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got a heart out now. Take care, guys.
All right, Peter.
See you,
See
Pete.
ya.
Peace.
Peace.
So it's sort of like, people who are saying we've got to overthrow the system, we've got to change the system, we got to break it down to rebuild it. It's like they don't really know what they're asking for, because there's a lot of chaos there that just, it's too chaotic, right? It's like the bifurcation, all the way down into the bifurcation, there's like just total chaos, right?
It's a mess. I mean, if you look at the collapse of the Roman Empire, or even more recently at the collapse of the Soviet Empire, right? As dysfunctional and predatory as those systems were, particularly towards the end,
Mm-hmm.
when they collapse,
It was bad for everyone.
it did cause not everywhere, a few places in Eastern Europe, did okay. But like,
Well,
if you
the
look
Roman
at Russia,
Catholic Church did good.
yeah,
And
but
if you
but-
think of it as a conspiracy in that regard, where they were like, hey, we're going to stop running the show and let somebody else do it. And it was almost like a consolidation. It was almost like the theory right now that like everything's coming to a head, and the people who are in the know that it is. They're consolidating their resources, pulling out of the market, and then letting all the people just fucking kill each other.
In like the case though of like empire collapse, I think it's important to point out that a lot of those places that do worse off, the reason why they do worse off is not because of anything to do with voluntary trade or voluntary exchange. It also do with political parasitism, right? Like, Cuba did really poorly when the Soviet Union collapsed. That was because of the Castros. If there was free trade in Cuba, then things would probably be a little bit different. Same thing goes for any collapsing state, right? When the U.S. was breaking up in the mid-19th century, all those horrors came from the central government, right? It wasn't because of the individuals trading; it was because of the politicians at the time.
Yeah. Do you think that the idea, like we were talking about, how do you market a good high-end living situation? Do you think that there's any place for using fear as a motivator?
I think it'll happen naturally, right? People are gonna, for example, right now, if you have the option to contract with a private security firm, you're motivated by fear to do that, right? You don't want to work with a police department that may or may not shoot you in the middle of the night, right? If you call them because someone broke into your house, you're going to obviously choose the private company that won't shoot you. So
Yeah.
fear is just going to be a sort of natural thing. I mean, if you're asking in a more Machiavellian sense, then
Yeah, like a moral. Do you have a moral responsibility to not motivate by fear? Because like
No,
in our
that's
discussions
a
with
good question.
masks and all of this, it's like, we talked about being nice about it, and like kind of like living the example, and not hitting people hard with facts or whatever. But is it appropriate to hit people with fear? Like, this will continue on into more and more despotism, into the point where your families will be carted off into concentration camps if you do not take the vaccine. Is that kind of like fear like appropriate to use? I don't know. I'm asking you.
I don't think it's unethical. It's effective. It's not wrong to do that because it's true and it's helpful. But I do think that coming at things from a place of this is what things can be like, this is the ideal: freedom, harmony,
Mhm.
human flourishing, higher standard of living for everyone. I think it's better spiritually, energetically to have people get pulled, like CJ mentioned earlier, the push and the pull, to pull people towards a higher ideal, I think is better energetically rather than to focus on the fear and stay in that fear paradigm, because I'm a big believer in the law of attraction and manifestation. And so if you're
Right.
focused on the beauty and the decentralized systems and that we'll all be able to live more harmoniously and keep more of our money, you're helping to manifest that. But the more you talk about the fear and the new world order and all sorts of stuff. But again, I like the 1-2 punch. Like I always start with the problem to kind of let people know this is serious business, and then offer the solution, the ideal, kind of go from one to the other.
Yeah.
Here's what could happen, and here's the steps to take to avoid that.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, if you look at the psychological literature, for just like people making major changes in their personal lives and everything to improve their life, you do kind of need both, right? You need the carrot and the stick.
Right.
And so, it's just finding, depending on your target audience, right? Finding the right balance of carrot versus stick for that particular audience, and then figuring out how to craft that message.
Yeah, then you have the issue of like, well, don't give me the stick. I want the carrot. But then, like, are you actually going to move? Are you going to do something when you're shown the carrot, or are you going to just continue on with your same patterns and habits and not actually go after the carrot? I know
Right.
I've been that's been me at times in my life. And it's almost a lot of times, like you said, CJ, people will, like at a big crossroads or some big like intervention, like with their families or something like that, that's when they make the change. When it's like, oh, I've got cancer and now I got to stop smoking, or whatever it might be. It's like sometimes the carrot isn't enough.
Oh, I'm going to the concentration camp. Maybe I shouldn't have given up my guns, right? It's always after the fact.
Right.
I think you make a really good point. I don't know. I think at the end of the day, like we said earlier, though, it really just comes down to a matter of leading by example. And I like what John said. You explain to people what could happen, and then you show them these are the steps to take. How many people who are into Bitcoin come from a country where inflation has ravaged the economy? How many people are gun rights activists because they live in a place where there were no guns, right? Like we see them on Twitter every day and social media. So,
well, the stick got me into Bitcoin, and then the carrot had me develop more of it. It was like, oh, I'm a big prepper. I built my whole life around the fact that all this is going to fall apart at some point, and it gave me the confidence to then say, now what is it that I want, right? Like I got prepared, I'm good, I feel confident that I can handle whatever comes. Now, like, am I going to sit here waiting for the end? No, I'm going to try to do something to stave it off and enjoy my life even more, right?
Okay.
I think I think it's the New Libertarian Manifesto, Konkin tells us to like really, I think he says to concentrate on like-minded people, and he suggests going after people in like the radical caucus of the LP, and like don't waste your time on these sort of Republicans and Democrats, because they're so far removed from the agorist message that you're not going to really find much success trying to convince them. So try to stick with people who are already sympathetic to the libertarian mindset. Maybe they're ANCAPs, maybe they're constitutionalists. As long as they fall somewhere within the libertarian spectrum, I think that should really be our target audience, or that should be our market.
Yeah, and like all of the preppers, like the products that came out on that prepper market, like they all did really well because a lot of people are aware and are avoiding the stick. It seems to be like a really huge motivator. I just don't think a picture has been painted well enough. And it's incredible for me to say that because we've seen the pictures of dystopian nightmares, we've seen the Mad Max movies, we've seen the zombie apocalypse movies, and yet people are like, oh, let's watch more.
So
It's like,
heavily indoctrinated.
Yeah, I mean,
there's a Orwell quote: "If you want a vision of the future, imagine a boot stomping on a human face forever."
Totally. And like, there's a warning. That guy was fucking off his rocker, and he was
Well,
right.
like, more to what you're saying, X, is like the thing that Orwell got wrong is that, you know, the only thing he got wrong really is that he didn't foresee that we would want the cameras there in the first place. Right? We would be the ones asking for the cameras there. So
Putting them in our pockets and in our homes.
yeah, right.
Yeah, it's more like Huxley, where people just they love it, they relish in the comfort and the pleasure of it all. Yeah,
One has to wonder if entropy is expressing itself at this time for civilization as this, press towards chaos. Everybody has to deal with entropy in some way, shape, or form. But how does it manifest? And can we control? Like, we're all going to die, but can we control our pathway to that doorway? You know what I mean?
Isn't that what agorism really is, though? On a very fundamental level, it's just entropy, right? We're really sort of tending towards chaos, tending towards individual empowerment in this sort of decentralizing force that sort of never stops, right? That's what cryptocurrencies do. They empower the individual. I mean, in a monetary sense, is what 3D printers do. It's what tokenized securities and assets do. It's what all of this technology that we've been discussing does. It's sort of just, like you said, it's just really just entropy at the end of the day.
CJ, do you have anything on that?
I'll just jump in and say that maybe it's one like consoling note or whatever. It's easy to get engulfed with New World Order conspiracies and whatever, and there's something to all that. On the other hand, there's a common thing throughout history where leaders think they're more in control and have things in hand than they do. And it's partly because of the arrogance of the sort of people who seek, to sit on the Iron Throne and wield the Ring of Power and mix all kinds of fictional metaphors together like that. And, I look back at World War I, for example. To me, that's one of the most dramatic cases of leaders thinking they've got shit under control and they know what they're doing, and don't worry, we have a plan. And then it spirals out of control, right? I mean, most of the dynasties that eagerly charged into World War I in 1914 didn't last the war, right? The Hohenzollerns, the Habsburgs, the Ottomans, the Tsar, right? All of them went into the war going, yeah, we got this. It'll be over soon. We'll win. It'll be awesome. And their dynasty ended. So obviously they thought they had everything under control, and they didn't. And if you want a more recent example of something like this, just go back and look at what the Bush administration said as far as how the Iraq war was going to play out, right? Super easy, barely an inconvenience. It'll be over in a few months. They'll throw flowers at us as liberators. Yeah. And next thing you know, it'll be a thriving Western democracy, and the whole region will probably turn into thriving Western democracies out of the example, right? And like literally
mission accomplished.
Yeah, it would cost hardly any money and just a handful of lives, and it would go super nice and whatever. And they believe this crap. And look how like the opposite of almost everything they said is what happened, right? And so that's kind of a consoling thing, is that as imposing and ominous and threatening as the powers that be can be, keep in mind too that they're arrogant as hell, and that they often think they've got everything under control, and they put their pants on one leg at a time like the rest of us, and they're just as limited in their knowledge as the rest of us, right? This is the folly of all central planning.
Yeah, so, that's good.
Yeah. Helpful. So the big takeaways I'm hearing is, live the life that you would want to live regardless of what's going on, right? Be liberty-minded, be free in your behaviors and in your thinking. And when people ask, well, how are you so, happy or joyous? This was actually how my wife and I met. She was like, how do you live the way that you live? You are so, alive and bright. And it was because, I live what I believe. And if somebody comes at me trying to stop that, I usually just deflect or move aside or whatever. But now I'm getting to the point where there's like not very many places to duck or move aside to. And it's like, where do I stand and say no, right? We are going to, I am going to live free or die, right? And communicate that in such a way that's not confrontational, but relatable, let's say, or even inspiring. I think that's what I would like to be as a person, is inspiring to others and say, there is a good way of living. There is a good way of conducting oneself. And we can not just do it individually, but we can all do it together on the playground of life, right?
Yep. Live your best life and tell everybody about it and say it's all because of freedom.
Exactly. It's all because of freedom.
Well, I mean, it is a lot of best life kind of stuff is because of freedom, not just political freedom and being free to live your life according to your desire, but spiritual freedom, financial freedom, freedom from chronic health issues, freedom from anger and your emotions controlling you. So I think freedom is a really great value and ideal, and we could point that out in different areas of our life that we're thriving in.
Yeah. So, I mean, ultimately, if we're expressing that and living that, then it'll be self-evident. If those of you out there who are listening are looking for good tactics to address people, I think we came up with don't call them sheep to their face. Don't insult them. Bring some of the facts in a way that is appealing. Like you have to be like, I saw this great video and there was a news reporter asking this dude, like, how can you be out here not wearing a mask? And he's like, I'm a trendsetter. And like that made all the, like it spread like wildfire. And that's the truth. It's like when you are living free, when you feel free, like you are the trendsetter and you're the cool kid on the block and you have to live that, embody that. And people,
Contagious.
What's that?
It's contagious.
It is super contagious, especially when you're happy. Like the reason why everybody listens to you guys, on your podcast and stuff is because people like watching or listening to people who are living their joy, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, there's a phrase for it and I forget the name of it, but it's basically like that's why sports are cool, because people love watching people do what they love doing.
Good point. Yeah.
And I think we'll end on that. Like people love watching people doing what they love doing. So really love your life. Feel that gratitude for what still freedoms you still have, and really exercise them like the muscles that you've got.
Yeah.
Amen.
Honk honk.
Yeah, and don't waste a lot of time playing chess with pigeons.
There you go.
Because we all know what happens, right? They knock the board over, crap all over it, and declare themselves the winner.
Oh, that's
Democrats. Jeez.
Yeah. Did you say Democrats?
Yeah.
All right, let's kick it off the live, CJ, and then thanks everybody for tuning into